Welcome back to Gold Derby. I'm Christopher Rosen. I'm so pleased to be joined by Joseph Shirley, a composer known for the Book of Boba Fett and the Mandalorian Season 3. And now he's here to discuss his work as composer on the great film Creed 3. Joseph, I know you worked with Ludwig Göransson on the first two films, obviously. And so coming here on the composer yourself for the third film here, I guess how did working on the first two help? And I guess where'd you want to start in terms of kind of like how you wanted to approach the score?
Yeah, it's with working on Creed 3 was definitely a full circle moment for me. It's like uh when I first started working for Ludwig, the first movie I did with him was Creed. I mean, or he was in the middle of it really when I jumped aboard. But that so I have many many memories of late nights, helping him along on that movie, and that was just such a treat to see his experience with Ryan Coogler and MGM, and how just how that movie, the great success of that movie, is a really impactful moment for me. And yeah, so but like Creed 3, I mean, it's like what we wanted to do really is build out its own sort of texture and flavor and sound in the score that at times maybe is referential to other Creed movies, but still takes a step forward in pushing that Creed sound along. And so I have quite a lot of experience from Creed 1 and Creed 2, and sort of know those movies and those storylines and that score very well. And it was nice to like sort of build upon that and try to push this Creed 3 into a sort of a new sonic landscape. I mean, and Michael was all there for it. I mean, he really wanted to go for it in certain ways, and just how ambitious he was with what the music could do with this movie was really special as a composer to work with somebody like that. So there are many key areas where I think we, sort of took it and ran with it and stepped away from like the known Creed sound and the known Rocky sound, of course, and made our own impact on this story.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's one of the things I love about your score, just listening to it in the film and then just on its own, is that like you're right. Like the Creed music is so iconic. The Rocky music is like obviously one of the most iconic, themes and film scores ever. And
Yeah.
then here in Creed 3, I'm like, oh man, this is all great. And it feels like so original to the film. And at the same time, like you're saying, like keeping the flavor of what we know and like what we're expecting. You mentioned like working with Michael, obviously, he's a first time director. I love he just feels so like the movie's just like I feel like he's so confident as a director just based on the movie, right? Because
Yeah.
it's just so you can just tell it feels like, oh, like of course he's like, this is great. I can't wait to see him direct more movies. I guess like when you were saying like pushing the music and stuff, like how like what were some places where you guys were like, oh, we could really push the sound
Yeah.
here, or like push this? Yeah.
I would say several. Really exploring the character of Damien, you sort of sympathize with him, or at least like when they finally get in the ring together, you sort of like don't know really who you're rooting for, and that's one of those exciting moments. Even just in storytelling, it's like who do you really want to win? So I mean, we wanted to sort of really connect with Damien as a character and connect with that backstory, as well as knowing that Adonis is our hero, and and is obviously the one we are rooting for, and for most of the story. So I mean, I would say that the sound for Damien score wise, it sort of introduced this bit of like sort of more of textural, atmospheric, sort of a nostalgic sort of flavor, sort of like hazy memories. I recorded saxophone, which was something that we haven't done really in a Creed movie, and I don't even it's not a pronounced saxophone sound, but it sort of just gave you a sort of sense of that sort of dreaminess and the mystery and the intrigue of that character of Damien, as well as actually like early on in the process, I was admitted access to a prison, a prison that was no longer in operation in New Orleans, and which is where I was living before I came here to Los Angeles. And yeah, I went around and sampled a lot of the prison cells, and the New Orleans police office was just so like welcoming and hospitable to this. And I was walking around, I mean, it was a very sobering day, to be honest, but we walked around and were able to sort of capture some of these sounds as if, thinking of Damien being locked up for 15 or 20 years, like what are the sounds he would be hearing? And so that sort of informed some of the sort of edgier percussion sounds that you hear when he's on screen. So Damien was definitely one. I introduced a new theme for Amara, Adonis's daughter, and that was fun to explore throughout the movie, as well as just sort of like taking like a more produced or contemporary approach on many moments throughout the score. You know, there's a lot of solo vocalists throughout it. There's a big sequence in the final boxing match that we all called the Void, when the crowd sort of dissipates and, you know, disappears. And there's a really featured vocal element. A friend of mine, Maya Sykes, who's just phenomenal. I had her come into the studio here, and Michael and I were just sort of like conducting her live to picture for several hours late one night, and that was a really special moment for Maya and me, of course, but like even just with Michael feeling that close to the process, and you know, really going for it in a different type of way than what we've seen in the first two Creed movies. Yeah, and I think even the influence of Dr. Dre on this movie was like an indelible statement on the sense of time and the sense of place, you know, and using his song "The Watcher" and sort of threading that throughout the score, and really climactic moments throughout the score was very special. That just stamped the movie with like, this is LA, you know, and the way that the movie begins, it's you know, you're immediately drawn into that sense of time and sense of place of Los Angeles.
Yeah, I love that about the film, and especially because like it's so different from, it really separates itself from the first two, obviously, which are like more with Rocky and in the first two, obviously, and like also Philadelphia and all these things. So saying like, it just felt great, and I love the way you kind of, the score works with the hip hop soundtrack. I just think all of that is so really, like the whole sound is just awesome. It just is so, it's so good. So yeah.
Hey, it's funny because like Creed 3, you know, obviously Sylvester Stallone is not in it, right? So like we needed to be self-referential to other Creed movies, and, you know, sort of reference those iconic things we spoke of. And but then, you know, as soon as Adonis wins that final boxing match, it's so tough to not really want that classic Bill Conti going the distance theme. So we did jump into a bit of a Bill Conti theme there. But it's just kind of like, it's what you want. It's, you know, it's like you're just looking for that, and you want it, and that's sort of part of the flavor of these movies. So we did jump around with a couple, you know, well-known themes here and there, but I would say overall it's you know, it's more of a produced or contemporary sound. And you know, we just had such a fun time with it. I mean, another thing about working with Michael was you know, he's known for his acting, and he's such a great actor. He was so into the middle of this the entire score, that it was like at many times he kind of spoke to me as if I were an actor, which was a really exciting sort of composer director relationship to have. You know, he was very encouraging and supportive, but also like we were right there in the middle of it. I mean, there were some cues that I was like writing live while he was here in the studio, because we wanted to just really get into the midst of their performances on screen. He you know, he knew the performances so well that he was really able to almost like direct me as if I were an actor, which was very cool.
Yeah,
that
it's
was a lot of fun.
awesome. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's awesome. I wrote down other ones you mentioned. I did Damien. I love that theme, and I was going to ask you about that. So glad you talked about that. Marianne has a great cue, obviously, and I just love that, and it's such a different vibe from everything else that you're doing, I think, in the score. And it's such a great, and really, I mean, that's such obviously like an emotional moment in the film as well, I guess. Like, yeah, can you, like, how did you kind of approach that part and like her theme, I guess?
That was, yeah. I mean, I love Marianne. She's a legacy character. You know, there. What I was attempting to do is sort of like reference just the sound of that sort of, you know, I mean, I would say like pop, jazz, classical sound that you kind of think of when you think of the old Rocky movies, and I wanted to sort of reference that in some of the harmony and sort of the aesthetic of that, since she, you know, has been with us for so long. That was a really special moment. I mean, it was like a rainy Saturday too when I wrote that bit of music, and it was like just like a sad day. That it was hard for me to not be so invested into that, you know, into that moment in the movie, just because like we adore her so much and she's so brilliant. So it was, I mean, I sent it to Michael, and he luckily responded to it and resonated with it. But it was like it took a lot out of me just to sit there and like, you know, to write her funeral music, you know. But we wanted to sort of reference the fact that she's a legacy character. I really wanted to have a solo cello you know, moment there, and that seemed to work well. And then even it just has a tinge of like a gospel sort of nature to it at moments. So that was another thing, you know, working with voices throughout the score. I love writing for voice and choir, just from my background growing up and everything. And you know, there's a lot of like classical sounding choir, but then there's a lot of gospel sounding, you know, gospel infused choir. So I kind of had two different choir groups sing throughout this score, and that was one of the moments where we featured more of like that gospel sound, and it seemed, you know, it worked pretty well, and that was a very special moment. But yeah, I mean, we sort of, as far as vocals go, there's so many vocals in this score, you know, and by the end of it, it almost feels like a Greek tragedy at times in that final boxing match, you know. And we really wanted to lean into that. It's like these two gladiators fighting to their last breath, you know, fighting, like dealing with their shared trauma together and everything. So I mean, we really took the we ratcheted it up in choir moments, you know, in certain ways that seemed fun, and it seemed to match the storyline at hand.
Yeah, it's great. I mean, and I think what you said earlier about like you're kind of the way Damien is presented in the film, it is like his story is almost like the original Rocky, right? Like he's like, you're like almost rooting, and it's like, and it just the way it works in the music, I think it's just so, it is so great. I wrote down other ones. There's the Showtime promo that you had to write music for, right?
Oh, yeah.
And that just rules too. I was like, when you know, it's funny watching the movie, I was like, this just must be like a real pro. It just is such a great promo. Like it's so well done. It looks so, it effect, like it looks like you would expect the Showtime promos to look.
Yeah.
And then your music for that is awesome as well. Like it's just so on point.
That I think so. That's Felix's. Well, the Showtime promo is like, it begins with Felix's theme. It goes into Damien's theme. It comes back to Felix's theme. But I think Felix had one of the stronger music.
I wrote that down too. Awesome.
Yeah.
Just awesome.
I loved it. Yeah, no, I had a lot of fun with that one, and you know, and he was a great character too. Well, his walkout was a lot of fun.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I had a really phenomenal singer, Jazz, help me write that. So you know, I had an instrumental track that kind of like references, you know, Mayan or ancient Mexican music, and she took that and just ran with it and sent me back some vocals. And so I played with it and produced it up a bit and like really made it work for that walkout scene. They actually played at least the instrumental idea, the theme for him on set, you know, when he was actually walking out. They were shooting in Atlanta, and that was the first bit of music I did for the whole movie.
Wow.
So yeah, but Felix, I had a lot of fun with Felix.
That is awesome. And again, like I said, like it felt like I was, when watching the movie, like, oh, this is like, must be a real, like an existing track or something. It just is so good. Like it's like really good. And that scene is awesome. It's so cool. And like, again, for like a character who's like not a minor character, obviously, in the story, but like a supporting, like to get that like full out theme, I just found like really cool and like so great. And then the last track, I think is the Champ, right, on the soundtrack or whatever, when we're at the end, and that is just, again, the way it ends and the way the movie ends, I was like, and you kind of crescendo up until like the end of it, and it's basically like you just want to run out of the theater, like run through a wall. It's so great. It's like, how did you kind of do that? Great. I just thought that is such a great way to end the film, and like even listening to it back, having watched the film like a few times and just listening to it before, I was like, man, this is so good. It's just like the best way to end the film. I guess, like, how do you kind of like to know that that's going to be the end of the film? I guess, like, how do you get, like, there's got to be pressure then to know, like, it's got to like land like that, right? You want to leave the audience like feeling like pumped, right? And I guess, like, like, how do you kind of like approach that?
They were, well, you know, it's funny, like the ending of the movie, they were playing with quite a bit. There were multiple iterations of it, and I'm really glad they landed on this one. I just think it's a really poignant way to end this particular storyline. You know, it starts with like an apology between the two guys, and then you immediately transition into Amara, and you know, it's like back to like Adonis the father, Bianca the mother, and Amara, you know, and it's like, it's just such a touching moment that you kind of like, you're wondering, all right, where's Amara going with this? You know, she's obviously a fighter. So I really wanted to lean into Amara's sound there. It just felt like a good moment for the family. So that, you know, most of that cue is Amara's theme. But it just made sense to really like bring the audience back into like Adonis. So I referenced Ludwig's Creed 1 theme, and then just a fancy finish by the end of it. But it needed to hand off to that great song too, Blood, Sweat, and Tears. So I mean, there were several different things to sort of like to check in the scope of that single cue, but it seems to sort of like tie up all the loose ends for the movie in a nice way.
Yeah,
So
it's great.
I love that.
Yeah, it's so good. And I guess like last thing here before I mean, like I know they've like I think Erwin Winkler talked about doing Creed 4 and perhaps doing it. Would you? I'm assuming since you've been working on all three of them, you would come back for the fourth one. But I mean, if there is a fourth one, like, have you thought about like what you would want to do? I guess who knows.
I would, yeah. I mean, I would love to. I would love to work, with these guys again, because I mean, it kind of feels like family at this point. I mean, it's like, and like the amount of time that I was able to spend with Michael was like seriously like one of the most amazing experiences of my life. Like he was coming into the studio every Friday morning, and we spent so much time, like the better part of a year, working together on this. And when you're talking about music for a story, it's like it's a really emotional thing, and especially a story like this. It's very difficult to not talk about like the heart of the story when you're trying to figure out what is the message you're trying to give to the audience in each scene. So I mean, it's like getting into the middle of the story and talking about the heart of it. You really connect with your collaborators in that sort of way. And so yeah, I mean, I would be ecstatic. I would be jumping right back in the ring, and so pumped for it. I mean, as far as what direction to go, it depends on the story.
Yeah.
Yeah. I have no idea where they're taking it, but I'm sure that they have a really slick idea sketched up, and these are some of the most talented folks working on these movies. So I'm very excited to have worked on this one, and hope that we can do it again.
Yeah, me too. As a fan, it's great. Joseph Shirley,
Yeah.
this is just an incredible score. Creed 3, you can listen to it wherever you listen to music. It's just great. Thank you so much for doing this.
Thanks, Christopher. It was my pleasure. Appreciate it.